It's on the floor. No, the chair was going to run somewhere.
No.
Yes.
Could you provide Director McCormick with a big cushion?
Yes. I need a booster.
Yes. And those lift up as well.
Yeah, I know.
But then you're.
Yeah.
How is it?
Oh, is it?
It is, yes. The booster seat is higher.
I was just going to get like a memory foam.
But yeah. The kids' table.
We'll take care of it.
Yeah, where have I heard that?
Okay,
before?
thank you, Chair.
Okay, we don't have Director Leishman, I imagine. Okay.
Oh, here she is.
Absence of Director Leishman.
Oh, she's here.
She's here. She's here.
Maybe
Give her a moment to get activated so we can. Here we are. Now we have Director Leishman. We'll call this meeting of the Finance Committee of the Cathett Regional District for Wednesday, June 22nd, 2022 to order. Recognize that this meeting is taking place on the traditional territory of the Shannon people who have lived here for many thousands of years. Oh, first item of business was the approval of the agenda. Motion to approve the agenda. Brabazon, seconded by Director McCormick. Any discussion? Gisborne.
Hello, Chair. Maybe the corporate officer can help me. I would like to add an item under unfinished business, reconsideration of item 7.4, number 8, from the May 18th Finance Committee.
Would you like to respond to that, corporate officer?
Okay, yes, thank you, Chair. So, Director Gisborne, through the chair, that item actually should be reconsidered at the board meeting, as that was where the decision was made.
Oh, my understanding was it could be done at committee, similar to the reconsideration that was done at the planning committee meeting in 2020. But if it works better for the board, we can reconsider it then, I believe, next week, if that works.
Director Gisborne, I can concur with the corporate officer's opinion that the board meeting is the appropriate place for a motion of reconsideration of the board decision. Any other discussion on the agenda? All those in favor of approving the agenda as circulated? Any opposed? That's carried unanimously. Brings us to the adoption of minutes. We have before us the minutes of the Finance Committee meeting on May 11th, 2022. Motion on that, please.
I'll move adoption of the minutes.
Seconder by Director Leishman. Any errors or omission or any discussion on those minutes? Let's see any hands. All those in favor of adopting the minutes as circulated? Any opposed? That's carried. And then we have the minutes of the May 18th, 2022 meeting. Would you like to propose a motion, Director McCormick? Do we adopt them? Director Brabazon, are you seconding it? Seconding. Any errors or omissions? Don't see any hands. All those in favor of adopting the minutes as circulated? Any opposed? That's carried unanimously. That brings us right now to item 4.1, delegations and inquiries. And the names on my list are Ronnie Uhlmann, Bouchard, Hewson, Beno, Colin, Malery, Levy, the Northside Recreation Center Building Committee, RE, the Community Approval Borrowing Process. So anyone who wants to make the presentation come up, you have 10 minutes. Pull up a chair where people can see you on the camera.
Thank you. So, thank you. My name is John Hewson. I'm a co-chair of the Lund Community Society, and I'm also on the New Building Committee. And as my first time before this board, so I'm not exactly sure of protocols, but I understand that today we are asking for the Cathay Regional District to begin a process of applying for a loan for the $1.1 million that would match or would enable the $4.2 million awarded by the federal government grant for the building of a new community center in Lund. Our board met last night, and the building committee met the evening before, and we had our AGM just a week ago, which was a heated discussion about the new building and how things should go. I think there are a couple of questions as to the exact nature of the process, but I believe we have two choices: to either go to referendum with the election in October, or to go with an alternative process that we would love to start sooner than later, but I understand wouldn't start until January. The federal grant has a deadline, as I understand, of April, so got a 1-year term that we have to begin action on the process. So we're just asking that we go with that alternative process unless there is reason otherwise to go with the referendum. Our understanding that the referendum, if there is a 50% no, then the process stops. And in talking to Patrick, Deborah, we weren't clear as to whether or not there is a second chance if there is a no referendum, but it seems that we would be rushed to be informing the community of the process and the options in designing the building and the site. So we felt that the alternative process gave us more time for engaging the community, informing the community. And that if in that alternative process we have more than 10% concerns, naysayers, there is the option to go to referendum after that if necessary. So that is the case, and we understood the process correctly. Our request is the alternative process. And I think the question, we had a lot of questions, but in summary of the questions, it seems like a chicken and egg situation because we're asking the community to make a decision to support something that isn't yet clearly defined. The clear definition doesn't happen until after the money is secured. And then we begin the process of site exploration, the fine details of the planning. So both the community concern, the board's concern, and the committee's concern is that the objections come through a lack of clarity as to what we will see as a result with the building, but we do want the building and we need the building as a community. And there are definitely people in the community that have serious concerns about budget, parking, sewer, water, noise, greenness of the building. So those objections we know will come in the process. And I think there is a debate as to the exact nature of the location of the building. So with all of that considered, we would like to proceed because we would like the building, and we believe we have a deadline of April next year to confirm that the QRD has borrowed the $1.1 million and I guess agreed to use the $500,000 that's in the NCRC reserve to enable the procedure to proceed and to, I guess, accept that grant from the feds. So if I've understood the process, or we've understood the process clearly, what happens next, I guess, is my question on behalf of Lund community.
I just like to ask the corporate officer if you think you could give a quick description of the two processes. Make sure everybody understands.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you through the chair. So you have described two processes properly. We currently have a bylaw for the $1.1 million. That is 2/3 reading and has been approved by the Inspector of Municipalities. That bylaw can only first go to an AAP, so an alternate approval process, which is as you described, we take the area in which the people who will be responsible for paying that tax, and we determine the number of electors, and we determine the 10%, and then we provide them an opportunity of at least 30 days to provide to provide their objections to the borrowing. If that didn't fail or wasn't successful, the board can use that bylaw to go to an assent vote within 80 days. And so that is currently planned in the plan for late 2022 and 2023. Alternatively, the board could introduce a new bylaw and go directly to an assent vote. But the bylaw we have in place cannot go to an assent vote. So those are the two options. And so an assent vote would just poll the electors in that service area with a question about if they approve the borrowing.
To be clear, that area is Area A, excluding Savory Island and Hernando.
Sort of. It is the Northside Recreation Service. So there is a boundary map there of the people who participate.
Is it possible for us to see a copy of that map and to see a copy of the rules attached to the $4 million grant that's been awarded?
Through the chair. Thank you. So yes, that map is on the website, and I believe it is linked to the project page as well. Okay. So the project page is just brand new as we just got the grant funding, and that's where staff will continue to put new information.
And then inside of that process that you mentioned, once it begins, is that a mail out with some sizzle or story about the potential of the building, or is it basically the feasibility study that has been used to secure the initial grant?
So, through the chair.
Go ahead.
So am I supposed to speak through the chair?
A little more leeway here, Dan.
Thank you for the leeway.
Delegation hasn't used up their time.
Thank you, through the chair. Yes, so we use our public communication and engagement policy to determine what level of engagement would take place for this type of initiative. So for borrowing, we want to see public meetings, information shared with the community members. That can be done a variety of ways. We have conducted AAPs in the Northside area, I think, for borrowing for a fire hall. So it would probably follow a similar process just to make sure that everybody had the information. And that process would be on the project page as well.
I think one of the concerns has been expressed. Sorry, don't be addressing through the chair. One of the concerns has been expressed is that with the fire hall, there was an incentive for people to be in support of it, because without a fire hall, insurance values change. With the addition of a hall and then other expected expenditure in the future with the water and the sewer upgrades that may be coming, then people are afraid of any increase in the taxes. And the naysayers may speak more loudly based on a financial concern for rising taxes, as opposed to looking at the need for the hall itself and the potential use of the hall and the different groups of the community that would be using the hall. So I guess how do we prepare the community for a positive response rather than a financial?
Okay. I'm not going to ask the corporate officer to respond to that, because that in itself is a political question.
Okay. All right. But as a community, we are allowed to rally our friends and neighbors in support of the process.
Do that. Yeah. Vice versa is still true. So I understand your request is that you would like the board to consider the alternate approval process.
I think that's what we're understanding is the best route forward. Okay. I see Patrick nodding, and
we'll just turn it over to the board members for any questions they have of the delegation and Director McCormick.
Thank you, Chair. This kind of follows up on the questions that the delegation was asking our corporate officer, but I would like to know if a referendum took place and if it failed, does that mean the issue dies at that point and cannot be revisited?
Corporate officer.
Thank you, through the chair. I'd have to double check, but I believe that the budget would need to change, the project would need to change, and I believe that there's a 6-month period.
Okay. Thank you.
Director Brabazon, did you have your hand up? No, I did not, Chair, but they understand the situation clearly. Okay, I think that was the goal. So thank you for coming, and we'll be looking at a report later on in the meeting and making a decision on how to go forward. So you're welcome to stay and enjoy that debate if you like.
Would you like a copy of our meeting minutes from our recent AGM? Does that help you? They're not the final approved minutes, but they do accurately record the building discussion. Is it useful?
Oh, you can leave it, but unless you have copies for all the board members that we can somehow get to them.
We can send it to you electronically at a later date, but at this point I have a copy if that's appropriate or procedure.
Give it to us and we can include it in the minutes if you like.
I have that too. Thank you. Oops, sorry.
Thank you very much.
So from here, do we hear formally that the approval has been made by this committee?
We'll be making that decision tonight.
Super.
Be able to stay for the meeting and watch it happen. And then it will be referred as a recommendation from here to the regional district board, and the final decision will be made at the regional district board.
Okay. And with that decision, is it likely that this happens before the election, or it wouldn't be until January? Is the timing part of that?
I can tell you that it's on the agenda for tonight, and the board the finance committee may or may not make a decision tonight. I can't predict what the finance committee is going to do, but there you go.
Okay.
Follow the bouncing ball.
Thank you.
Where it goes after we get to that item on the agenda.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you for your time. Thank you.
Thank you for taking the time to come all the way in here from the north end.
My second step. And thank you for helping us with that grant. It's huge.
Yes.
Thank you.
The major accomplishment. Thank you.
You're all leaving?
Should we be staying? Can we come back later?
Looks like the crowd is clearing out. They're going to miss a lot of excitement. Give them a moment to unfinished business. We have none that I'm aware of. No correspondence tonight. Regional growth strategy cost estimates. Randy.
Chair, I'd like to move a different recommendations. I move that the committee recommend the board dismiss any further consideration of developing a regional growth strategy at this time based on the significant financial and human resources required.
Here's a seconder. Director Brabazon seconds the motion. I'm going to give Ms. Rodden the opportunity to address anything that she wants to bring up in her report. Obviously, to me, there's been a lot of work gone into writing the report. I'd like to hear anything staff has to say about it before we make a decision. Ms. Rodden.
Thank you, Chair. In some ways, I'd prefer to be participating virtually because then I have my computer, I can share my screen. But I've just come from Wellington Beach from the public event for the coastal sea level or coastal flood adaptation strategy. Yes, so regional growth strategy, currently there's 10 in the province and they are all within high growth areas of the province. One thing that's not in my report that I found out after the deadline for the report is that the Sunshine Coast Regional District and the Cowichan Valley Regional District are both also talking with the province about the idea of doing a regional growth strategy. And I wanted to mention that because I thought you as directors might want to reach out to your counterparts at either one of those regional districts to see what their reasons are for considering a regional growth strategy. The information that I gained from talking with the Ministry of Municipal Affairs and with the RDs that I was able to make contact with, there are benefits, and some of those benefits are in areas where there are common concerns between the member municipality and the RD. So, I mean, housing is a big one, development pressure, where that development is going is a big one, and economic development and where that is going in the region is another big issue. The province would support this regional district. Doing a regional growth strategy would be able to free up some of their staff resources to support it, because they do see them as a benefit. However, there is no financial support any longer. So they did fund those RGSs in areas of high growth in the province, and they're not currently funding them. That's not to say there might be something that comes available. They said you can never see into the future that far, but they do promote regional planning, and they are aware that our region does do a lot of regional planning, social planning, emergency planning, etc. But there are benefits, but the cost is significant. And I know Jason Cowenhoven is on the call now, and he did do some research around the financial implications in the report. So you might want to hear what he has to say as well.
Mr. Cohenhoven, are you online? Looks like. Would you like to add anything to the report?
Thank you. Yes, through the chair. Just a comment on the funding is that these types of regional growth strategies are eligible under the Community Works program. So if this type of project was approved, we would have a source of funding to consider for that. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. So I'm going to try to go about this in an organized way, and I'd just like to give the directors opportunity to ask any questions they have of staff right now, and then we'll get into the debate among the directors if that works. So does anybody have any questions of staff? Director Gisborne.
Thank you. Sorry, something in my throat. I'd like to thank staff for the report we have before us. I had one question though. I think it was under the source of funding, and I believe the quote was potential sources of funding to develop a regional growth strategy include gas tax funds, community works funds, or regional feasibility study funds. I know that there's an electoral area feasibility study fund, like kind of separate service, but I'm not sure where the regional feasibility study funds fits in. Is that the electoral area feasibility studies, or is that something separate that is paid for by the whole region? Just like some clarification on that. Thank you.
Rodden or
I'll defer to Jason Cowenhoven.
Jason, you have an answer to that question.
Thank you, Chair. So at the time of writing this report, we were considering all of the options, and one of the discoveries was that some of the larger regional districts, like the Capital Regional District, they've actually established entire services for regional growth strategies, and then executing some of the deliverables that come out of those projects. So the feasibility study may not be the best fit here, as we wouldn't know about service establishment until after the report is done. But it was an option, and that's why it's included in the report. Whether it would be a regional feasibility study or some other way of funding, like an EA feasibility study, that would depend on the size of the growth strategy and which areas participate.
Thank you. That clarifies. I was a little curious when I saw regional feasibility study. I was like, wait, is there another service? That's kind of new. Yeah, thank you very much for answering that question. I guess the last question I have from staff before we get into the debate would be, would it be possible for, say, joint funding of such an initiative, or share? Because I hear that the province might be able to share staff, possibly grants, but at this time, nothing concrete. Would it be possible to partner with the City of Powell River or Uhlmann Nation if they also have interest in participating in this process? Because that's my understanding of a regional growth strategy, is that it's a kind of fairly comprehensive initiative between multiple parties. So I'm just wondering, is that a funding option?
Ms. Rodden, do you have an answer for that question?
Yes, I do. Thank you, Chair. An RGS is initiated by a regional district, and the member municipality is consulted in that, but at the end of the day, the regional board makes the decision on whether to go ahead with the RGS or not. And so the funding comes from the regional district. First Nations, the province has confirmed if a regional district wanted to include a First Nation in their RGS process, they would support that in principle. But a First Nation is not bound by the Local Government Act. And so all of the section of the Local Government Act, Part 13, that deals with regional growth strategies, that's all binding on a member municipality and on the regional district. It's not in a First Nation government. So they wouldn't be participating kind of at a level playing field. But it is an option. And I guess it could be a conversation as to whether they would want to contribute funding to participate in that.
Thank you. So Director Fall, you had a question.
I did. Thank you, Chair. And thank you, staff, for the excellent report. Regardless of what we do, this will be really useful for the board moving forward. My understanding from page 46 of the provincial RGS guide, which is on page 74 of our agenda, is that the Islands Trust is excluded from being included in an RGS. And I went and looked at the Islands Trust Act, which says section 36.3, a regional district board must not adopt an RGS that applies to any part of the trust area. So I have I guess a comment and a question. So please correct me if I'm wrong in my understanding that Leskidi cannot be part of a Kethet RGS. And the question really is, what role would Leskidi have and the regional director from Leskidi moving forward through this process, given that we've got this situation with Leskidi being in the Islands Trust?
Does anyone have an answer about whether Director Fall is correct? Ms. Rodden.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I did discuss this with Ministry of Municipal Affairs staff. And yeah, you're absolutely correct that the Islands Trust is excluded. And so electoral area E would not participate in the RGS. But whether there is a nuance there that the services that the regional district provides there, if there's some role for the for the area E director and some peripheral role in the planning process, I'm not sure of that. I'd have to do more research, but I could find that out.
Well, that's only if we go forward. And thank you. The provincial guide also has information on section 37, which talks about agreements that could be done and so on. So I guess if there is something, then it would be entered into with an agreement with the Islands Trust rather than in the RGS itself. But I would suggest no extra work be done on this unless the board decides to go forward with an RGS. Thank you.
Director Brander.
Thanks, Chair. I have a question for staff through the chair. You mentioned in your report, Ms. Rodden, that these RGSs are usually undertaken by governments in areas of rapid growth. Would Kethet Regional District be considered an area of rapid growth?
Yeah, through the chair, we are not considered to be in an area of high growth.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks. So any other questions for staff, and then we can get into simply debating the motion. Don't see any hands up, so thank you to staff for your participation. The directors, any comments? Motion on the floor. Director Brander.
Thank you, Chair. The motion is pretty self-explanatory. I think that we're not really in the right position to do this. The cost is exorbitant. The approximate cost would be 4 years, $100,000 per year. require a lot of staff time. I don't want to see staff spend more time on this kicking it down the road in the strategic planning session. I don't think it's necessary.
Thank you, Chair. I've been hearing from concerned residents in my area over the last several years about continuing development pressures. The consensus I've been hearing is that we are in a transition period in our community with the mill closing, changing demographics, and people are wondering what is the long-term vision of our community beyond just our OCPs, because the municipality has their OCP, their chair, their kind of vision, and the electoral areas have their own, and then you also have Uhlmann Nation. I am actually going to recommend voting against this resolution, and I would offer a different resolution if the motion before us fails. And that motion would be that the committee recommend the board refer consideration of developing a regional growth strategy to the next C3 meeting. I believe that a regional growth strategy affects all three parties of our C3, Uhlmann Nation, City of Powell River, and the Cathet Regional District. The financial costs are the primary concern at this time for this initiative, and I share those concerns as well. Due to our relatively low population, I believe this is covered in the staff report, and also not having to deal with multiple competing municipalities, the cost of developing a regional growth strategy is lower than the larger counterparts. I believe there was mention of anywhere between $800,000 and $1 million, and we're looking, I think at the high end, $100,000 a year for 4 years. The source of funding, of course, will be a big challenge. I believe that this initiative, if it goes forward, would need to be a joint collaborative effort that would involve the elected leaders of the regional district, the City of Powell River, and Uhlmann Nation. And I think that would be in response to our regional community is facing major social and economic challenges, and we are at a time right now that I think we can all agree is in a point of transition. I do believe that if all three of our governments work together, that we can present a strong case for provincial funding to help address these growing local challenges. That the process can help us work with the provincial government to achieve their objectives as well. I don't think that we should just vote down consideration of a regional growth strategy without first bringing it before the C3, which is, I believe, where the topic of regional growth strategies initially came up. So the motion before us, I plan to vote against it. And if that motion fails, I plan to bring forward another motion to refer it to the C3. Thank you, Chair.
Anyone else? Director Brabazon.
Thank you. Well, we've heard quite clearly that we are not in an area of rapid growth. We've also confronted with a cost of $100,000 a year for 4 years, plus additional staff dedication. We've also heard that Powell River and Uhlmann Nation actually have no direct role in a regional growth strategy. It's up to this regional district and up to us alone. The Islands Trust, of course, is on the sidelines. And I just frankly, I think this motion is a valid one. We're getting way ahead of the game. I am not aware of any great growth in any area of the Cathet Regional District.
Anyone else? We have a motion in front of us. It was made by Director Brander. All those in favor of the motion? Any opposed? Director Gisborne is opposed. The motion passes. Next item on the agenda is 7.2, which is to consider Texada Gillies Bay Airport wildlife fencing project financing options. That all out quickly. Director McCormick.
Thank you, Chair. I would like to move the following recommendation, and it is under option 3 on page 6 and 7 of our report. And that is that the committee recommend the board receive the Texada Airport fencing project financing options report dated March 3rd, 2022 as information, and that staff be directed to continue exploring opportunities for grant funding, and that the fencing project be put into abeyance until such time as funding through grants and taxation is obtained or the community has expressed a desire to proceed with borrowing for the project.
I have a seconder for that motion. I see Director Fall's hand up. Any discussion? Director McCormick.
Yeah, thank you. This recommendation follows directly from a meeting of the Texada Airport Advisory Committee, which met in mid-May. And of course, Chair, we have advisory committees primarily to give us advice on things that they have increased expertise in. And in this case, the committee strongly recommended that this is the wrong time to be putting this forward. Texada residents have taken a whole pile of financial hits, from increased taxes to gas prices that are, out of the roof, and we don't have a transit, system to depend on. And of course, COVID is still the lack of revenue from things that didn't go on. So there's a lot of financial pressure right now. And although it makes sense for fencing to be considered as the right solution over the long term, I'm afraid right now, if a referendum was to be held, it would fail dismally. There is strong opposition to this from the grassroots level, reflected in the advice from the Airport Advisory Committee. And so I think that we have a wildlife management plan now as part of the airport management plan, and that has worked well. We have not had an incident in 5 years. There was an incident in 2017, but that is the last one. And the wildlife management plan has been followed and is working. And for right now, Chair, I believe by taking this decision, it empowers staff to continue to seek funding if opportunities arise, but it doesn't close the door on future fencing considerations, which, if the referendum failed, as we've heard, we can't do it again. So I think the chances of it failing are so great that it would be far better to hold off, not make a decision right now, and revisit it, in a period of time. So, Chair, that is why I'm putting forward this recommendation.
Thank you. Anyone else? Director Leishman.
Thank you, Chair. I'm just wondering if we can hear from staff further to the discussion, analysis, and the report regarding Transport Canada's recommendation, and whether there's what the risks and liabilities are of not going down this road, and whether the wildlife management plan is going to be seen as being sufficient in this interim.
Ms. Howie, do you have an answer for that liability question?
Thank you. Through the chair, what I can offer is that Transport Canada does not require a fence for the airport, and it doesn't require a fence for airport authorization. It does say that a wildlife management plan would need to be submitted with an authorization application, and that wildlife management plan would be reviewed and audited with the rest of the application. It's hard for me to answer a liability question. I'm not a lawyer, but I can say that the Transport Canada has also issued what I think is called a flight supplement that warns pilots that there are a known deer activity in the airport, in the area of the airport. So pilots are made aware before entering and leaving the airport of those risks.
Thank you.
Thank you for that answer. Anyone else? I just have an observation myself, but reading that motion, and it's not a simple one. I think really what the motion does is exclude the option of borrowing for the present time. Leaves open the possibility of grant money and taxation without borrowing. Just want to make sure I understood it. Anyone else? All those in favor of the motion? Any opposed? That's carried unanimously. That brings us to the financial assistance policy amendments. Rena, are you with us today?
Yes, I am, Chair.
Would you like to explain your report?
Yes, thank you, Chair. So this report is based on the February 24th, 2022 board meeting, where motions were adopted to make amendments to the financial assistance policy. And these are in regard to a number of questions that have come up. The most significant question that came up was around whether the funding should be through economic development or arts and culture. There's always been a question around that. And so this policy addresses that question and adds arts and culture as another initiative under the grants and aid program. It takes it out of the economic development funding pot and puts it into the grants and aid funding. And this also addresses a number of other questions that have come up, and they're outlined in the report. But one of the big ones is the project budget. Often when we get an application from a group, it's not exactly clear. We get a budget, but we don't exactly get the particular budget for the project and all the sources of revenue. And I think that these changes make it a little clearer for the applicant what we actually require as far as a budget. So I'm hoping that these changes will address a number of questions that have come up during the intake processes.
Thank you very much. Anybody have any questions? Or comments?
Do you want to get a mover and a seconder?
Okay.
Director McCormick?
I'm not moving the recommendation. I would speak against it if it is moved.
Okay. I have a question. I have a couple of questions. And I think it's on page 3. It talks about the notice and the check being sent at the same time. And the practice is to send the notice that a grant has been approved and the check at the same time. I'm not sure why that would be necessary for the summer grant. It's a public document. It happens at a board meeting where the grants are approved. It makes sense to me to notify the people that are going to be beneficiaries of the grant as soon as the board knows that the grant is going to be given, and to send the check later. To send the check, the other effect of that is it doesn't give staff the opportunity to talk to the person that or the group that applied for the grant and make sure that they still need the money or can use the money or adapt any situation. And it wraps into my next question, which was the part on page 4 that talks about putting a question on the form to ask if they have gotten a grant from the city of Powell River. And I think that needs to be clear because the city has granting from 3 different pots, basically the city of Powell River granting aid pot, the community forest grant, which makes their determinations and makes recommendations to the city of Powell River. And the Cassette Regional District also has some grant money. And I think we want to make sure that we know what people are applying for and what different revenue they're applying for, making sure that all those 3 separate parts of the city are addressed in application forms. And I think it's important to have a separate time when you provide notice that the grant has been given between then and when the check is issued, so staff has time to review that and make sure that the money is still needed for the purposes that were applied for in the grant. Dr. Brabazon.
Thank you, Chair. I differ slightly with your interpretation of the reference to page 3. says you will be notified and the grant paid out by August. It doesn't, I interpret it to mean that you will be notified and then sometime the grant will be paid no later than August 31st. I don't read it as you will be notified and here's your check all at once. So with regard to the questions, are you getting money from Powell River, etc.? I think those are perfectly valid and good questions.
But if you don't mind me just responding to that, on page 3 of the report, there is kind of a subheading that says page 3.
That's what I'm looking at.
Partway through, it says, in practice, the letter of approval or denial is sent out at the same time as the grant payment. That's my issue.
Ms. Green has her hand up.
We will agree to disagree on that. I think.
I see Ms. Green's hand up.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, that is the practice. We generally send a letter with saying that the grant is approved with the check at the same time. So, so I would, and that is what this wording was intended to clarify. So if the board does want us to notify the funders or the applicants and then follow it up with the check, then I would recommend that we make a change to that, to that clause.
Anyone else?
Thank you. I do have a question of staff, and it pertains to page 17 of the report, exclusions from eligibility. And when I look down the list of exclusions, the first one in red type, at least red on the hard copy, which is the third bullet under that topic, says organizations that serve primarily their membership. As you recall, Chair, we have had a debate at this table regarding the Texada Legion and whether they primarily serve their membership or primarily serve the public, which has been debated and discussed and isn't the subject of discussion tonight. But I would like to know what this line here, organizations that serve primarily their membership, is that opening the door to further battles over the Texada Legion, which will of course come. So if they get excluded from eligibility for that reason. So my question to staff is, does that phrase, would that include the Texada Legion?
Ms. Green.
Thank you, Chair. The Local Government Act talks about delivering services to the public. So that is why we've always tried to think of things as serving the whole public, not just certain portions of the public. And that is why that clause is intended to exclude organizations that do serve primarily their membership. But if there's a case where a group also serves the greater public, then the board could agree to include them.
Director McCormick.
Thank you. Quick follow-up then, Chair. Does that mean that anytime the Legion applies, say for permissive tax exemption or whatever it is they're applying for, does that mean that they're automatically going to be excluded by staff because they serve, are they considered to be serving their membership, or does staff accept on the basis of past arguments that have been presented and accepted by this board that the Legion does serve the community? Does that mean that the Legion would not be excluded on that basis?
Ms. Green.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Chair. I think that the organization would have to, make the case on a case-by-case basis of whether they serve primarily their membership or whether they serve the greater public. And especially with permissive tax exemptions, the Local Government Act does say that the board can give permissive tax exemptions for public recreation, but that is supposed to be recreation that's open to the public and not just to a certain group.
Okay. Any other questions? Director Gisborne.
Thanks. Hearing from Director McCormick, I've got similar questions and similar confusion, and maybe I can have that clarified. So organizations that serve primarily their membership, one of the arguments I would hear from either the Legion or the golf course, or, we got a lot of nonprofits that, they have members. To become a member of those organizations, quite often it's open to the public and anyone can join. And that's kind of the argument I would hear, from these organizations that say, hey, our memberships are open to the public. And quite often the membership dues are, just to cover the costs of that nonprofit. I preferred the wording that was there previously, which specified religious organizations that serve primarily their membership and or their direct religious purposes. But I find that organizations that serve primarily their membership and or serve direct religious purposes is a little too vague. And I can see how that can become problematic in the future, where nonprofits which the board could see as eligible might not even apply, because they might look at that exclusion from eligibility criteria and think, well, we're serving our golf course members or our Legion members, or one of the other nonprofits that we have in our area. That's kind of my first concern. But then the next one that I have a question I'd like some clarification on is the private invitation only events. I'm thinking of the Sports Hall of Fame. They had ticket sales, which are open to the public to help them raise money. I'm just not sure, how is private invitation only events? Is it like the organization sends out the invitation, or is that what that means? Or is it, maybe they're selling tickets or something like that? I'm just kind of curious. I'm going to presume that it only means very private, and it's up to the organization to send the invites, and it's not open to the public. Is that just a little confused there? Thank you.
Ms. Greenan.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, the intention of that was intended to mean if the event is only open to, they're only going to send invitations to a certain group, and the public isn't welcome to purchase a ticket or to go to the event.
Okay, thank you. That clarifies that concern. So now I'm fully comfortable with that line in the exclusion from eligibility. But I'm still hung up on that organizations that serve primarily their membership. I share Director McCormick's concern on that one. Thank you, Chair.
Anyone else? We are at the point where on the agenda, the recommendation that's on the agenda is that the committee discuss the current Community Works Fund allocation policy 3, financial assistance policy. Right. Adopt the amended financial assistance policy 3.1 with changes as outlined in the report presented to the February 16th, 2022 Finance Committee. Director Brabazon.
Thank you, Chair. You've already raised one interpretation, which I differed with. And I think because you and I have read the same section and we ended up with differing opinions, that perhaps clarification, and I think to achieve what we would both desire, which is a separate notification and a separate later check, that I will offer an amendment and simply delete the changes mentioned as page 3 with regard to notification and check payment dates.
Seconder for that.
That's a policy.
I'll second.
Director Gisborne is seconding it. The corporate officer is just trying to type it out in the chat. So
sorry,
see what it says.
I think I understand.
Chair, point of clarification. We don't have a motion.
You just hold on for a moment, Director Fall. We'll get the motion first, and then we'll clarify it.
Okay, so okay, fine.
Thank you through the chair. Could you continue restate that motion?
Yes,
That the policy be
delete
amended
the,
to
delete the proposed change
change.
where discussing notification by July 31st and a check in August. And the same for December.
Okay.
And simply delete the proposed change. So we're going back to what we have right now, July 31st for a notification.
Okay.
And a check a month later.
So once my computer is back up, it has failed. It will be that the policy be amended, the proposed policy be amended to delete the proposed change to notification.
Yep.
Okay, thank you.
Mover and a seconder. Director Fall, you had a question.
Yes. Do we have a motion? Is this amending a motion or is this just a main motion?
This is sorry, if I can through the chair.
Go ahead.
This is a main motion.
Oh,
Okay,
right. We never did get the first motion.
Yeah, that's what I wanted to. It sounded like an amendment, but it's a main motion.
Yeah.
That's what I want to confirm.
It's actually proper though, to you, it's a proper motion.
You can amend it before we adopt it.
The first motion on the table.
Yes.
So you can amend the report and adopt the amended report later. That's what I'm saying.
Thank you.
If the committee would like that, then I will move the recommendation minus the deletions that I mentioned.
Oh, thank you. No, I think we have a proper motion that has been moved.
Okay.
We could have a seconder to that motion
Okay.
and deal with that if that's what the chair agrees with.
We have them. I'll try explaining again. We have a motion on the floor to amend the report.
Opposed.
Been
What is
moved,
the motion,
seconded.
Chair?
Director Leishman.
I'm going to share it right now. I have just been removed from the Zoom meeting, so that's why it's taking some time to join.
The wonders of the interweb.
Yep.
Okay, so is that visible to everybody?
Yes.
I see some heads nodding. Okay, any discussion on that proposed amendment?
Do we have a mover and a seconder for that one?
Good.
Okay, thank you.
Director Leishman.
I'm just clarification that this is a partial motion. So are we to vote on this motion, then move the motion that's on the agenda?
That is my expectation of how things will go.
Okay, thanks.
All those in favor of the amendment?
Of motion, the main motion?
No, on the amendment. We're voting on the amendment that is before you, that the proposed policy be amended to delete proposed change to notification and check payment. All those in favor?
Sorry, through the chair, this is the main motion. Is this not the main motion?
Corporate officer, you'd like to make a comment?
Yes, thank you, Chair. I think, yes, so this is a main motion. Once this motion is dealt with, then the next motion would be to deal with adopting the policy. If we had moved that main motion that's presented, it would be best to table that to deal with this type of motion. So this is the proper procedure to deal with this main motion and then to deal with the next main motion.
Okay, I hope everybody understands that the motion that is on the floor. It's the one that's in the chat. All those in favor of the
Chair?
motion? Director Gisborne.
Thank you. Now that we've got that clarified, that this is a main motion rather than an amendment, because we can't amend amendments, I would like to propose an amendment that we also strike out the change that deals with religious organizations and organizations that serve primarily their membership.
Is there a seconder for that?
I'll second that.
Any discussion? Director McCormick.
Thank you. Well, it seems like if we're going to make changes and the accepted procedure is to make the changes first, then make the motion second, then I support making this change. I believe that it just adds to a lot of confusion down the road and regarding what organizations serve their membership and which ones serve the public. And we're going to get into keeping logbooks of how many hours it gets used by so-and-so. I mean, the Legion keeps all those logs anyway, but I'm just thinking it isn't necessary. It's a lot of wasted time for people and better to just simply leave it out. And I support leaving it out for that reason.
Thank you. Anyone else on that motion? Director Leishman.
Yeah, I don't fully agree with that amendment because I think that the part that speaks to religious organizations specifically has a purpose as an exclusion, and it was in there originally. So I'm just wondering if this is, you know, we're taking out too much of the exclusion clause that should be, part of it should be left in and related to religious organizations.
Director Gisborne.
Thank you. Since I moved the amendment, maybe I'll try and clarify that we strike out the change and keep the original line, which is, quote, religious organizations that serve primarily their membership and or their direct religious purposes. That was what was crossed out. The proposal for this amendment is to just revert back to that original language, and therefore religious organizations that serve primarily their membership will be excluded from eligibility, and hopefully that then makes it clear, because it seems to be the general organization serving their membership is the challenge that we're running into. I think that's the motion or the amendment I put forward. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, if you're done, Director Gisborne, we can get the corporate officer to record the motion.
Well, first, just an amendment must propose to strike out, add, or insert to the motion that is currently on the table. So the motion that is currently being proposed isn't actually changing this motion. So it is again another main motion. The motion that's being proposed is proposing to amend the policy, but not actually amend the main motion. And so it might be best to deal with the motion that we currently have that addresses the amending the policy with regards to notification and check payment, dispense with that motion, and then propose another main motion to amend the policy.
The corporate officer is offering what I think is some valuable advice to help us to work through what we're doing here. We have one proposed change to the report that we could vote on and decide on. We could then have an additional one, which would be Director Gisborne's motion to make another change to the report and vote on that separately. And that way we'd be talking about one idea at a time, and perhaps we'd be able to get through this report in the time that we have. So I'm going to suggest that we should deal with the original amendment, the original main motion. And we come to Director Gisborne's other motion after we've voted on the first one. Does that make sense, Director Gisborne?
I think it does. I thought we could do an amendment with just an "and" on the end. but we can have a separate standalone motion if that works for the assembly so that we can move along. Thank you,
I
Chair.
think it might make life easier to move along. So if we could have the financial assessment policy motion that's in the chat stands alone by itself. It was moved and seconded. We had discussion. I'd like to call the vote on that one, which is about notification. All those in favor of the motion? Any opposed? Carried unanimously. Now, Director Gisborne, you could make your motion.
Okay, I'll try and keep it as similar to the last motion, that the proposed policy be amended to delete the proposed change to religious organizations. Is that close enough for the corporate officer to work with?
Just 1 second, and I will share it to ensure, before we get a seconder, to ensure that the wording is as intended. And I'm just going to check. I've received a notification. Just, I want to make sure that a further wording wouldn't be better suited.
Yeah, maybe proposed change to the line referencing religious organizations. Would that help? So after 2, just change to the line referencing and then religious organizations.
Wording. Would this be clearer?
Change to... yeah, we could even get rid of the word religious, because wouldn't that then be organization? No, it's fine the way it is. I think the assembly and everyone knows what it is that we're talking about. Just reverting back to that original line on page 2, I believe, or on our agenda, page 115 of 384.
I see all kinds of hands up. Director McCormick, I'm waiting for Director Gisborne to be done.
I see Linda Green has her hand up.
Finish the typing.
And I would like to hear from Linda Green, and she might have some valuable information. Thank you.
Okay, we see the motion that you've made. It's been seconded, I'm assuming. Ms. Green, you had your hand up.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I think in this motion we need to have that the proposed policy be amended to delete the proposed change to, as Director Gisborne said, the line referencing religious organizations that are excluded from eligibility. And the reason that's important is that I do have 2 other changes. So we don't want to delete everything. We just want to, in this case, delete the change to the religious organizations exclusion from eligibility.
Are you willing to accept that advice, Director Gisborne?
Absolutely. That looks wonderful. So just before line where the said change to line to the line, just add the word the, and the motion before us should there. I think that looks great. Does that look good to you, Ms. Greenan?
Yes.
Okay, I'm very happy with that. Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Corporate Officer, and thank you, Ms. Greenan.
Director McCormick.
Thank you. I was just going to suggest referring to the 3rd bullet under exclusions from eligibility, but that is the same line. So yeah, I think that the original wording clearly set out the intent of this exclusion, that it does religious organizations were not appropriate to be applying. Organizations that serve primarily their membership is a much broader category than religious organizations. It could be a dance group, a music group, a guitar group. You know, even though I'm just saying it's a very broad, you know, kind of definition that I don't believe is in serving the intended purpose, which was to focus on religious organizations. It adds a lot of confusion in the interpretation of the policy. And I believe that the original wording that is in that 3rd bullet the part that was scratched out, is actually much more appropriate than the proposed wording. So I believe that we should stick to the intent, and that is to focus on religious organizations and not try to paint a very broad brush for all organizations that serve their membership. So
Thank you.
thank you, Chair.
Anyone else? If everybody understands the motion, call the question. All those in favor of the motion? Any opposed? Carried unanimously. Anyone else?
Director.
Director Fall.
Thank you, Chair. And thanks for clarifying the process. I agree, one change at a time helps us stay focused. I have some general comments that I'll save till if and when we get to the actual adopting the policy. I want to start by thanking Ms. Greenan and the finance staff for their thoughtful proposed changes. I would like to avoid it's a change I'm proposing is just to add 2 words before at the start of the 4th bullet on the exclusions from eligibility. I would like to avoid prohibiting our only means of providing support to outside organizations based on board initiatives. The proposed amendment would clarify that outside organizations would be excluded from applying for financial assistance, but would leave the possibility open for financial assistance based on board initiative for situations that we cannot foresee. So the motion, and I guess the board officer hopefully has it, is just to add the words applications from at the 4th bullet. So applications from charitable organizations. And that would make it clear that we would be excluding applications from charitable organizations that are outside the Cathet Regional District.
I'll second that.
Corporate officer, have you been following?
To add
or sorry,
to insert.
I just sent the words to you. Sorry, my apologies, Ms. Jones. That's got all the. You've already typed it.
Take your time. This is one of the exciting parts about dealing with it line by line at the meeting.
Director Fall, I don't actually have a message from you.
Okay, oh, why is it doing that? Send. Oh, it says you're not in the meeting. That's why. That the proposed policy be amended to add the words applications from prior to charitable organizations in the 4th bullet of the section on exclusions from eligibility.
Sorry, prior to what?
Charitable organizations. So the phrase would be applications from charitable organizations in the 4th bullet. And my apologies, I had hit return a few times on the chat, but I can see now it's telling me you didn't get it.
Through the chair, there's nothing like typing in front of a live audience.
Yeah, well, you know, I'm patient. Everybody else is.
I think we need to see.
Okay, Ms. Greenan.
Thank you, Chair. I think we just need to add to that 4th bullet under exclusions from eligibility. Thank you.
Okay, does everybody see the proposed motion? Any discussion? Director Fall.
Very briefly, because I already said what I needed, but I think we can't foresee the future, and we may be in a situation where we want to provide financial assistance to a nonprofit, to a charity outside the QRD, and we learned through the process last month that this was effectively the only way we can do it is through our grants and aid. So if we make this change, that won't close that door. And if we make the change if we don't make this change, then we're closing the door on that option. Thank you.
Anyone else? Director Brander, you got your hand up.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I guess I'm still a little bit confused how adding the words applications from changes anything. We have prior to that in bullet 1, applications from individuals. And the next 2 bullets don't have the words applications from, and now we're adding it to the 4th bullet. I'm just not, I guess I'm not clear as to what difference there is, or what purpose the modification, serves.
Does anyone have an answer for that rather direct question? Director Gisborne?
Yeah, the way I read the motion, and hope maybe Director Fall can correct me, is that exclusions from eligibility, the application coming from an outside organization, say the Red Cross, would be excluded under our policy. But if the board wished to provide funding to one of those organizations, the board could choose to do so based on this policy, but we would not be accepting applications from outside organizations. Is that my understanding? Is that a correct understanding? That's how I've been reading this, and that's my understanding.
Interesting. Director Fall.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, that is what I meant. And to address this applications from individuals, I mean, that's a separate change. I think it should just say individuals, the first one, because unless we want to leave it open. So we're excluding applications from outside organizations. Organizations not in the QRD wouldn't be allowed to fill out the application and submit it, but the board would be able to provide funding if we so wished to charities. And that would be the only, it would actually clarify that would be the only thing we'd be allowed. If you remember during the process, we actually received information on funding some local governments gave to help Lytton. According to this, we would not be able to help the town of Lytton or any town local government directly, but if there was a charity operating in a town in BC that needed help for some catastrophe that happened, then we could consider providing financial assistance at a board initiative to such a charity.
Anyone else on this topic? All those in favor of the motion? Any opposed? That's carried unanimously. I don't see any other hands up. This might be an appropriate time to make the recommendation in the package.
I'll move the recommendation.
Okay. Do I have a seconder? Director Brabazon. Any discussion? Director McCormick.
Thank you, Chair. There are a number of flaws, in my opinion, in this proposed policy. And one of them can be pointed out on page 9 of the report, where it is talking about the provincial government, it's talking about economic development. And it says the province of BC outlines some common priorities among economic development strategies, including making and selling more local products, promoting your community's assets, more productive use of your property, paying more taxes, getting more skilled workers, and so on. Every single one of these objectives is contained within the events that Texada Arts, Culture, and Tourism puts forward, whether it's the artist tour, whether it's the fly-in, whether it's the Roots and Blues Festival. You know, people are putting forward their talent and meeting these definitions for economic development, yet we are proposing to take them out of the economic development portfolio and put them into grant and aid, while other tourism initiatives such as Sunshine Coast Tourism or Tourism Powell River remain within the portfolio of economic development. I really do not believe this is the right answer for that particular organization. Everything they do is about economic development and bringing wealth in from off island to Texada. That is providing the economic development so that artists can work, musicians can work, and so on. I believe it is wrong to take arts groups out of economic development and put them into grants and aid. So I guess the worst one for me is the Texada organization, because I know firsthand the benefit to the economic benefit to the community that all of their events provide. So I would like to propose an amendment to the policy. Since we're amending the policy, the recommendation is on the table. So the amendment would be that Texada Arts, Culture, and Tourism continue to be funded through economic development as other tourist organizations are done.
Corporate officer, would you like to try taking up that amendment?
So we currently have a motion to adopt the amended financial assistant policy.
With the exception of Texada Arts, Culture, and Tourism, which would continue to be funded through economic development.
I think what Director McCormick is trying to do is make an amendment to the financial assistance policy recommendation. And if we can get the amendment written down, then we could have a discussion and see if that's what the board wants to do.
Because if the amendment was, sorry,
I'm not asking for argument about why you support the amendment. I think it's clear that you do. What I'm asking you is to repeat the wording so that the corporate officer can write it down and everyone can see what we're talking about.
So it would be that the motion be amended to
the motion as written, if I may, Chair, would continue with the changes that outlined in the report presented to the Finance Committee, with the exception of Texada Arts, Culture, and Tourism, which will continue to be funded through economic development with other tourist organizations.
That the motion be amended to add. I'm going to share the screen and just ensure that I have the wording correct.
Yes.
Okay, so that's the amendment you want to propose to the motion. A seconder an amendment.
Second for discussion.
Director Fall. Okay, so you have something you need to add, Director McCormick.
Chair, I think I've summarized why keeping this group in economic development matches what the provincial government is putting forward for common priorities for economic development. That's exactly what it does. And I believe that with the other tourist organizations, it should be categorized the same way. So that's why I'm proposing to move that.
Thank you.
Back to economic development.
Anyone else? Director Gisborne.
Yeah. First, I have a question, and then I got a concern. My first question will be to our manager of financial services. This this motion before us, or this amendment, is to propose an amendment to a policy to include the name of a specific organization that we will fund them through economic development. When I read through the policy, I didn't find specific reference to organizations that have applied to us or specify that we will continue funding them through any source. So I'm just curious, like, is that kind of normal for our, like, to have our policy specify different organizations and what they're going to be funded from?
Karina, you have an answer for that?
Thank you, Chair. So my take on it is that the policy is just trying to, put the generalities of these applications and figure out which funding pot they come from. So it's hard to be specific with a particular application, and it was difficult with the Texada Arts, Culture, and Tourism Society to figure out, like, do they fit under economic development or do they fit under arts, culture, and tourism? And because of the particular initiatives that they do, and they do also promote tourism. So when staff looked at it, we just tried to figure out in generalities where would these organizations best fit. And we thought that because they have such a diverse range of initiatives that they finance, that they best fit under arts, culture, and tourism. But we can, when we're doing the budget, we can decide to budget for that group under economic development. We're just looking at this in general, trying to fit all of the initiatives into the right categories and all of the organizations.
Okay, thank you for that. Now I'm going to express my concern with the motion, but also, or the amendment, but also my agreement with the concerns raised by Director McCormick. On page 109 of our agenda, which is the staff report from February 16th, there are 3 bold points. And the first one says funding flexibility. When an application is considered, it could be funded only from the areas that are expected to benefit from the initiative. For example, if a particular event is projected to benefit the residents of areas A, B, C, and D, the event could be funded from those areas alone. This mirrors economic development and Area B allocation that is generally used for current economic development initiatives. As another example, if an art and culture initiative is proposed that is expected to benefit residents in electoral areas A, B, and C, the initiative could be allocated from grants and aid in those 3 areas alone, even though it supports what is currently considered an economic development type of initiative. I share that statement. Like, I share the same concerns, the same belief. We get applications that have an economic development aspect, but trying to fit it into the economic development service, I think, continues to add confusion to this board. When we look at the policy that is proposed on page 121, there are 3 boxes that the applicant can check off. One is grant and aid, the second is economic development, and the third is social planning. In grant and aid, building on the pillars of sustainability, economy, environment, culture, infrastructure, society, and governance, that fits grant and aid. So whether it is a tourist benefit or a social benefit or an economic benefit, to me, isn't really all that important. What is important is, does it fit with the policy of creating a community benefit? The next question should then be, well, who benefits? And therefore, we should then consider funding these initiatives through grant and aid. Area B contributes to initiatives that occur in economic development without being part of economic development. We can just use grant and aid. I don't have an issue supporting Texada's arts and culture events with Area B grant and aid, as long as, Texada is also, supporting other grant and aids. But I don't see the need to even use economic development to provide these grants. It just keeps causing more challenges as to, well, who pays and whether it's economic development, whether it's social. And you hear from our staff that they're trying to juggle this ball and to find out which box it fits in. Every electoral area has a grant and aid. Honestly, I would even propose just removing economic development and social planning reference from the policy entirely, and we can just use electoral area grant and aid to meet the same objective. And what was it, page, I think 10 or page 9 from the previous, it even showed that economic development has a $1,500 a year administrative cost. So I think the policy should just say who benefits, does it fit our policies, and we use grant and aid. I don't see the need to use economic development. That's my concern. But for the amendment itself, I don't think we should reference individual organizations and where we're dedicated to funding them. I think that's a conversation that comes up when we receive an application. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Corporate officer, you were going to intervene with the suggestion, right?
I was going to intervene with a suggestion earlier. The amendment, I'm going to share what the motion as amended might look like. But prior to doing that, that motion would be what staff would consider a standing motion. So we would have that as part of the consideration every year when they do financial assistance. They would look at that and it would be a standing motion. As it stands now.
Right now, what we have is a motion on the floor proposed by a board member.
Yeah.
I'd rather not add more possible future motions into the discussion.
No.
I'd rather actually deal with what we have in front of us, which is a very specific motion. Anyone else want to speak to that motion? And I would like to contribute my thoughts. I think it's a really bad idea, frankly, to talk about including one organization in one grant stream and not others. I think that's way more specific than policy needs to be. I think we're trying to create a general policy on grant applications, and the final decision is always going to be in the hands of the board. And they will, and I've seen the board make the decision that they think is appropriate at the right time. I don't think we need to overthink it, and I am definitely against putting in language that says where one organization's grants must come from. That's my 2 bits worth. If there's Director Fall.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, it's an interesting discussion, and we have struggled with, we're trying to, our financial assistance policy has been developing over the last couple of years. And one issue that we continually struggle with is how do we match the areas that pay for a grant with areas that benefit from the grant? There is some wording in the policy to that effect. Director McCormick has raised some, I think, valid concerns about the best source of grant funding, but I concur with the comments that, this is maybe not really the best way to deal with that. I can imagine TACT, for example, coming forward with a project that clearly does not fit economic development, in which case we've kind of got the standing motion. So I sympathize with those concerns, but I also believe there's been some other pertinent points. And one of them is that, made by Director Gisborne, is that the Economic Development Service, which we've struggled with now, maybe some types of grants are coming out. Perhaps it's not, that service entirely is best not to be used for grants at all, and that they're all done via grants and aid. And one idea that has percolated through my thinking on this over the past while is that we might want to explore at strategic planning a more formalized process regarding grants for projects that benefit different combinations of areas. For example, when we are unable right now to provide a grant and aid that, under our current structure, we're unable to provide a grant and aid that would be appropriately supported by a subset of electoral areas plus the city of Powell River. That's just not possible. It's kind of all or nothing. So we could have formalized the process to either direct such applications to applicants to consider applying to the city of Powell River, and that's in the report, or possibly, and I don't even know if it's possible, but to set up a separate individual grant and aid budget for the city of Powell River, and maybe then in either setup, the general grants and aid and the economic development grants and aid may become redundant, and we actually go through a process where we link areas benefiting with areas that are paying, and with some of the, of course, concerns raised about tact and that it benefits the mainland. So I think that should be, personally, I think the appropriate place would be to put that to the strategic planning session. That would be a really good topic for strategic planning. I don't know if a motion needs to be made to do that, but that would be an appropriate topic to review this kind of matching the areas that pay for grants with the areas that benefit, and how that process would work to address factors and make sure things are fair and equitable. And I think that would be a preferable way than a specific organization mentioned as a standing motion. Thank you.
Oh, we have an amendment on the floor. Ms. Greenan, did you have something you need to add?
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to mention that the way that we have structured it, for example, with an organization such as TACT, where it benefits areas A, B, C, and D, that's exactly where it's being funded from. So whether it came from the grants and aid or the economic development and area B, the funding is still coming from the same group of taxpayers.
Thank you for that. Anyone else on the amendment? All those in favor of the amendment? All those opposed? The amendment is defeated. Really a good try though. So we can go back to the main motion, which I think is on the floor. If we see what it is that we're talking about right now. Director McCormick.
Thank you, Chair. I think there's still a number of issues that are outstanding. And I'm not happy with the current policy that diminishes the importance of economic development for area grant and aid. I think economic development is something we should be very proud of supporting in this region, and diminishing its role, I don't think is the right way to go. I also think Director Fall raises a very good point about matching who pays with who benefits. This policy doesn't really do that. And so what it's telling me is that there needs to be some more work done. Maybe we need to have a workshop on grants, period. Maybe that should be something that the new board would do rather than us. But I believe that we should do that prior to adopting the policy amendments. I believe we need to flesh these things out more clearly than they are. And I would prefer to wait and get the policy right rather than leaving the door open to, well, I don't benefit, so I don't pay, and who pays an economic development versus grant and aid. Like, these things are still murky waters. So, Chair, I believe it would be better to hold off and not approve this until such time as further work is able to be done on it.
Thank you. Anyone else? Director Gisborne.
Yeah, I don't think we need another workshop or a strategic planning session. I think we had a short sleeve workshop for economic development, and my stance today is the same as it is there. I think we should, remove the reference from the policy towards economic development and social planning, and that those bullet points that are part of economic development and social planning be included with the bullet points of grant and aid, because as Director Fall pointed out, there are some grants where the municipality participates and some where they don't. The only grant that they do participate in is general grant and aid. The City of Powell River does not participate in economic development with the regional district. They do not participate in the social planning grant and aid service. So to me, the economic development service and the social planning service, handing out money to the organizations, whether it comes from grant and aid or those two other services, doesn't really make any difference to the taxpayers. And whether it meets our objectives and our priorities and what we believe is economic development or social planning is up to the board and up to the policy. I support economic development initiatives, and I support those through the Area B grant and aid. Area B doesn't participate in the economic development service, but we still contribute, we still support, we still help. So that's my thoughts on it, that we don't even need economic development and social planning for handing out grants. We can just use the grant and aid system. And that's what Area B has done. And I believe that's what Area B will continue to do. Thank you.
We have a motion in front of us. Any hands up? All those in favor of the motion? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Any opposed? McCormick is opposed. The motion carries. Director Brand.
Chair, can I request a 5-minute break?
A 5-minute break. Probably a good idea. 7-4 is going to be any shorter than 3. Let's take 5 minutes. My clock says it is 5:40, and we'll start again precisely at 5:45 p.m. on my laptop.
Recording in progress.
Thank you, Chair.
Okay, well, I've let it go 1 minute overtime. Apologize to everybody on that. Next item is item 7.4, community funds, community works fund allocation policy. 7.4 in the KIP, we have another report. And I'd like to give Katrina an opportunity to comment on the report as it sits in front of us.
Thank you, Chair. So to develop this report, staff researched policies from 10 other regional districts. And then we tried to look at what worked well for them and then gave the board some options to change our policy based on what's worked for other regional districts.
Okay, is that all?
Yes, Chair. If the board would like to consider any of the proposed changes, that's what this report is intended to do.
Director Brander.
Thanks, Chair. Get out in front of this. I move that committee recommend to the board that no changes be made to the community works fund policy at this time, and that community works fund policy be discussed at the next strategic planning session.
Seconded for that. Director Brabazon. Director Brander.
Thanks, Chair. I just, pardon me?
Have any comments?
Yeah, I do. I think this is too big of an issue to deal with in this setting. I think it'd be much better for us or the next board, I guess, to gather and get the thoughts down over the course of a few hours. Give it enough time to work on it and come up with a conclusion.
Thank you. Director McCormick.
Thank you, Chair. This is one situation where I don't support the status quo. And when I look at the information that is provided in this report, Alberni Clackwat, they allocate to electoral areas, Mount Waddington, electoral areas, North Coast, electoral areas, Bulkley and Chaco, 100% to electoral areas, Kitimat, Stikine, Squamish, Lillooet, Strathcona. And when I attended EVICC, I learned from other directors that I can add Cowichan Valley and the Sunshine Coast Regional District to the list of regions that allocate community works funding according to the electoral areas. In some cases, it's by base population and then, or rather a base amount and the rest by population. In some areas, it's about the number of services that are added. In some areas, there's say 10% taken off for projects that are regional in scope, as opposed to electoral areas in scope. But the pattern is pretty clear when I look at what other regional districts are doing. And I believe that it is a good pattern. Those regional districts have made decisions to allocate the community works funding that way for very good reasons. Because I believe that is the right way to go. I have a problem with the way we do it, to be honest. I believe that funding should be allocated to the electoral areas so that projects have a greater opportunity to come forward and that there be guaranteed certainty from year to year what that funding would be. Of course, all of the criteria would still have to be met. I'm not suggesting that they wouldn't, but I believe that a lot of the other regions are doing it differently for a really good reason, and that we should be doing it that way as well. I think it's more fair to the electoral areas, and I think that it is a better way to go. So I would like to see us change the way we allocate community works funding.
Thank you. Director Brabazon.
Thank you. I too have concerns with the status quo. However, the motion before us is simply to refer this to a strategic planning session, which I think will be the proper place to thrash out, because we could spend 2 hours on this very subject. And I will support the motion to just send it off to the strategic planning.
Director Gisborne.
Thanks, Chair. I don't believe we should send this off to the strategic planning session for a number of reasons. One of the first reasons is strategic planning sessions aren't really open to the public to see the discussion, and Community Works Funds has a fairly significant public impact as it results in some, how the funding for major projects operates. I don't like the status quo of this policy. My concerns for this policy are the same concerns I had in July of 2020 when we adopted this policy. It's one of the reasons I think I voted against it and also tried to have it referred back to committee. My concerns when we changed the policy to what we have before us are that before the policy, I believe, read that it was up to the electoral area directors, because Community Works Funds is provided to regional districts based on the electoral area population. I've seen in this report, and I thank staff for creating this report, there's a lot of really good information in here for how other regional districts allocate Community Works funding. It's very thorough. There's, each regional district is different. However, there seems to be some consistency. And one of the things I heard from speaking with elected officials from outside our jurisdiction was, if our policy states that we will provide funding to projects that are regional focus or benefiting a larger portion of the population, which is, I believe, policy guideline 5D, one of the questions that came up was, well, if you're using Community Works funds towards shared services that benefit the region and the larger portion of the population, and is the municipality contributing their portion of Community Works funds? And as I'm aware, the answer to that is no. That doesn't mean we can't put Community Works funds into shared services. For example, I believe Paget Road Bike Path went through Regional Park Service, which is seen as a regional service. However, the benefit at the time was interpreted to be, a benefit more for the electoral areas, and therefore the electoral area directors, I presume at the time, supported it. I would prefer to go that route, where it is up to the electoral area directors, and therefore we would need to have a electoral area services committee, which there appears to be reference to electoral area services committees in some of these policies from other regional districts. Now, the city, of course, still votes on everything that comes before the board, but we have a planning service with a planning committee. The municipal directors and the Lasky director can participate there if they wish. So I don't support the motion. I think we should, work in a committee setting and fix this policy into how it reflects the views of the board. Thank you.
Director Fall.
Thank you, Chair. I do support this motion. I think we don't have a rural services committee right now and may in the future, but I think it makes sense to have all the directors there in my mind. And strategic planning, we wouldn't be making final decisions. We would just be rolling up our sleeves and putting ideas out, and then maybe coming back with something that can be reviewed in a more formal setting. In my view, and I don't want to make my comments long, because as Director Brabazon said, the motion is to send this to strategic planning, but we want our approach to Community Works Fund to be flexible, effective, and fair. And when I look at those policies, and I want to thank staff for doing an excellent research on summarizing the different approaches, because there's a lot of food for thought there of how some are, where they all are on the spectrum of possibilities. And flexibility is supported by issues such as pooling funds, not imposing strict rules on how the funds are spent, making things more general. But flexibility might impact on fairness, at least how some directors might view fairness. by some areas. And one example that showed up to me in terms of our own area is that, of course, I'm always looking for, what might be happening on Lasqueti. I think Lasqueti Island has benefited quite fairly, but Area C seems to have received less benefit than other areas. And that I think is something that could be addressed by looking at the fairness rules. And one of the ways we've been doing this and that we could do more formally is to monitor results with reports such as the very good summary provided in the staff report, and include that in some of the factors used to prioritize projects. So we have different factors aligning with strategic priorities, community well-being, capacity building, but one factor that could be included, not just regionality, but geographic equity, just making sure that areas that haven't received a lot in the past, that might elevate some projects. Another thing that's changed recently is that CWF can now be spent on fire halls. And so I think that should be part of the discussion, because we've heard from our manager of emergency services that that's a possibility. And I think given the expenses of fire halls, that's something that we need to think about. And how do we do that? How would that be rolled into this? Because I think the balance also needs to be discussed between focusing and prioritizing QRD projects as articulated in Guideline 4 with projects that might come from community organizations as articulated in Guideline 6. So I think a lot of it comes down to prioritization, how projects are prioritized, and keeping the flexibility. So I really think that topic is really appropriate for strategic planning. I think rolling up our sleeves and talking through these ideas and seeing if we can land on an area of consensus, or the future board, I should say, would be really appropriate. Thank you.
I don't see any other hands up right now. There's a bunch of people who want to speak for a second time, and I will record those speakers. I haven't spoken before, and I'd like to get my 2 bits worth in. So we have before us an 85-page report on our Community Works Fund. We have a copy of the existing policy. There is no alternative policy with any recommendations for changes in the package. Everyone who has spoken so far has a long list of carefully considered concerns that I think deserve careful thought. Personally, I've had this report in front of me since Tuesday afternoon, or Monday afternoon, or actually early Monday morning or Tuesday morning. It's a lot to take in, a lot to analyze, and a lot to make suggestions on in one time. And having just gone through a discussion about grants and how they're allocated, that took us a considerable amount of time where we were making changes to small bits here and there. I think this report and the whole idea of Community Work Fund allocation deserves some time applied to it by the members, and some thought of each of the, how do we allocate the funds? What are the different ways to do it? And there are a lot of different ways to do it. What are the priorities, and how do those affect the future? The report goes into talking about those things. I think they deserve consideration, and careful consideration, rather than sitting around the table as 7 of us here with limited preparation time and saying, I think we should change this word, and I think we should change that word, and maybe it'll turn out okay at the end. So I think the idea of having a discussion at a strategic planning session is a good idea. That those don't have to be private. They can be open to the public if the board wants to, and we can listen to what the public thinks. But I think having a strategic planning session where we deal with this carefully, take the time to think about it properly, would be useful. And we don't have to rethink it every time we come to making a grant application for the Community Works Fund. So I'm in favor of this motion. Director Brander, you've been waiting patiently. Thank you.
Thanks, Chair. But I mean, everything that I was going to say has been said. My motion was just saying that I don't believe this is the correct forum for this.
Director McCormick.
Thank you, Chair. Sure, I can live with going to strategic planning, or taking this to strategic planning. As long as we really do get into how we want to allocate the funds. Excuse me. Director Powell raised an interesting point. Excuse me, about geographic.
We don't want to watch you choke to death.
No, I know, and I don't want to choke to death either. But geographic equity, I think, is a really good point. You will recall that some months ago, a request came forward to this committee from the Gillies Improvement District, and they were looking for $60,000 to put toward excuse me, their water project, which is an eligible project on the list of criteria. And although we had close to $1 million in the bank, this board, this committee refused to agree to give them $60,000 toward their water system. And, you know, I think that's really kind of mean. So anything that will address a better way to allocate these funds so that we aren't being mean.
Sure, I think it's unfair to categorize the other members of this board as being mean.
No, I'm saying the decision was mean, not
The decision was made by the members of this board.
Point of order, Chair. Director McCormick has the floor.
I wanted crosstalk going around the table. I'm going to ask Director McCormick to stick with her discussion on the motion, stay away from criticisms of board decisions and decisions of other people, and just stick to the motion on the floor, please.
Okay, I said what I need to say, and I will support taking this to strategic plan.
Thank you. Any other discussion? Director Gisborne.
Yeah. If we were going to change the policy tonight, I would just, which we're not, I would recommend just reverting to the policy as it was before July 30th of 2020. Something that got brought up by Director Fall has me asking a question in my head. Rural Services Committee. I believe that we used to have a Rural Services Committee. Was that abolished by board direction? How did that disappear? That's a question to staff or some of the more senior members, because I recall that there was a Rural Services Committee and now it's gone, and I'm wondering where it went and how that happened.
Director Brabazon.
I would like to move the previous question.
Is anyone going to answer my question?
Director Brabazon has moved to previous question. Does he have a seconder for that? Dr. Brander. It's been moved. It's been seconded. The motion is to cease debate. All those in favor of the motion?
I thought I still had the floor, Chair. Did I not have the floor?
No. Did you ask a question? No one had put up their hand to answer your question. Director Brabazon made a motion. I'm calling the question.
Oh, I had not finished speaking. My apologies. I was waiting to hear an answer, Chair.
All those in favor of ceasing debate? 1, 2, 3, 4. All those opposed? 2 are opposed, Director Fall and Director Gisborne. All those in favor of the motion on the community works policy, put up your hands. Which is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yep. Any opposed? Director Gisborne is opposed. Thank you. That brings us to the interim financial statements to May 31st, 2022, 7.5.
Move the recommendation.
Dr. Fall beat me.
Director Fall, I'm going to let Director Lee second that one because she had her hand up really quick. So there we go. Ms. Greenan.
Thank you, Chair. So these are the interim financial statements to May 31st, 2022. And just to clarify that they are not audited, and they just represent things that have been events or invoices that have been posted to the end of May 31st. And I don't see any real concerns. There are a couple of areas that are highlighted in yellow that are not exactly where you would expect to be compared to budget this time of year, except that there are valid reasons for those. And there are a couple of areas where we are overspent in one line item, but I don't project that to be a problem, as there should be underspending in some other line items within those same service budgets. So year to date, I don't have any concerns with these financial statements.
Okay, any questions for Ms. Greenland? Director Powell.
I have one question, and I really appreciated all the yellow highlighting, because a lot of the items are on track, and I think it made it really easy to review. I just have a question about the regional park service, and maybe through the chair, Ms. Greenland might be able to help me understand. There's the one yellow item on the Tlaman contribution, and I was just wondering, I couldn't quite figure it out, so maybe Ms. Greenland could explain what's going on there. The budget was 7,500, and the year to date's 89,82, and so I wasn't quite sure what those numbers, why they're like that.
Ms. Greenland.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, we base the budgets on our completed roll values, and so basically, while we're going through the budgeting process, we budget that we think this much will come from the Tlaman through their contribution agreement. But then when all of the dust settles and we finally adopt the budgets, there's often not time to then adjust to the amounts that we budget for in the agreement. So what's contributed here is the actuals. So for example, when we are going through draft 3 of the budget, then we look at, okay, that means a certain proportion for Tlaman in their service agreement. But then if we make some changes, it's difficult to incorporate all of the changes. It's sort of a circular change process. So the actuals are often a little bit different than the budget. And that's what's happened here.
Okay, thank you. It's not a large dollar value, it's just a large variance in terms of percent, and it was just curious that it would go up 20%, but yeah, I get it. Thank you.
I had one, there's only one thing that really stood out for me, having gone through all those, is the Northside Fire Department's equipment and maintenance budget, which was 240%. And I was wondering if there was specific trouble with equipment. And I think you've explained that there are other line items in their budget that would probably cover that overage, but I just wonder if there, I think the note says there might need to be a budget amendment for that.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Yes, I was looking at the details of that budget, and it's, general equipment repairs and maintenance, like SCBA testing, tags and labels for the equipment, and yearly pumper service, like the normal equipment and operations and maintenance. So I think that it was basically just when we were doing the budget, we do the budget specifically line by line. And I think that there wasn't enough funding put into this line item. So they'll have to look at that next year when they look at the budgets, that maybe this line has to be increased.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? So there is a recommended motion in the kit. Recommendation is that we receive the interim financial statements to May 31st, 2022, is that we recommend the board receive. Somebody like to make that motion?
We already have.
You already did?
Yes.
We're behind the 8 ball here. How about all those in favor of the motion? Any opposed? That's carried. Report of Directors' Remuneration and Expenses. It's always one there. Over two. I'll move it. Moved by Director Brabazon, seconded by Director Brander. Any discussion? We've all had a chance to read through the report. All those in favor? Any opposed? Carried unanimously. Statement of financial information. We've all had a chance to look through that.
The recommendation.
Mover, have a seconder for that. Director Leishman. Any questions for staff? Director Paul.
I had one question and maybe a comment. So I'll ask my question through the chair, most likely from Ms. Greenan. I'm looking at I found the ratios very interesting because there's lots of different ways to divide different numbers to look at how we're doing in comparison. And then the net, and I don't have the page number here, but the net book value of tangible assets to the cost of capital assets, that we're on the high side, which I presume seems good, that we have high value compared to the replacement cost. My question is, we're going, we're in the midst of a high inflation period, and would high inflation would that be pushing up the replacement costs and thereby pushing down this indicator? So is that likely to have a downward pressure on this metric that we won't be looking as good after a year of 7 or 8% or 2 years of inflation at that level?
So, Ms. Greenan.
Thank you, Chair. So the net book value of tangible capital assets to cost of tangible capital assets is the net book value is based on the cost amortized over the lifespan of the asset. So that won't go down because the depreciation, the annual depreciation won't change. It's still based on the book value. So the only way that ratio would go down would be if we fail to replace assets, if we fail to keep them up to date. So if we let our assets deteriorate, then that ratio will go down. But it shouldn't go down just as a result of inflation because, for example, we'll be replacing an asset, say at a high dollar value, a high cost, but then it's still going to be, if it's an asset that lasts 50 years, you're still going to depreciate it by 1/50th of that cost. So as long as you are replacing your assets and not letting them deteriorate, then the ratio should stay consistent.
Okay, that's great. So my understanding now is that the cost, the capital cost, is the original cost, not replacement cost that might go up. So thank you.
That's correct.
Anyone else? Don't see any other hands up. So all those in favor of the motion? Any opposed? That's carried unanimously. Thank you very much. No, that's not the last financial motion we have of the evening. We go on now to the Lund Center Loan Authorization Elector. So, we have a motion, Director Brabazon.
Chair, I have a motion to make, and I want clarification before I do so. The motion as worded is strictly to deal with the $150,000. It doesn't really refer to option 1, 2, or 3. And I need clarification that if we take with the 150,000, as I read option 1, for example, it says that that would be the way we would go. So perhaps staff could clarify that for me.
And corporate office.
Thank you through the chair. So the board has already approved going through an alternate approval process for the bylaw. So all that's required to continue on with this with The AAP as proposed with the bylaw as it is to third reading is a commitment to allocate the planned reserves. So there is currently some money in reserves, and there was going to be future money into those reserves towards the project. And then we would have enough funding to cover the potential shortfall.
Good. In that case, Chair, I'll move the recommendation. Second is Director Uhlmann. Thank you. Discussion. Only to say, Chair, that when I go out of here, I'll be notifying the delegations that came here tonight that this is what we've done. Sounds like you. Okay, I won't determine that. But I have a question for staff, and I've read the report, and I believe, having got my calculator out, so when we talk about allocating a further $150,000, it's $150,000 total. Not $150,000 for 2023 and $150,000 for 2024. There's some ambiguity in the way that sentence is written in my mind. I'm sure that it means a total of an additional $150,000. It's true. If that's the truth.
That was the intention of the motion, was to transfer the total amount of $150,000.
So that's good. I'm glad about that. I have a couple of concerns that I want to mention. If the community wants to go the alternative approval process as opposed to a referendum, I'm going to stand in the way of doing that. We see the budget. I find it a little bit surprising that the budget has gone up only $177,000 since 2019. That seems really conservative to me for inflation over the period of time. Every other place that I hear about, which is sending out RFPs for construction, talks about vast increases in construction costs, opposed to small ones. This is, I think, something around 10% or less over a period of 4 years or 5 years, depending on when we get to it. So that's one of my concerns. The other one is whether staff has the time to actually get the RFP and get all of the stuff done between the results of the alternative approval process and the deadline that they have for commencement of construction. It seems to me a very short time. And my experience is that projects that have been approved by the board are taking more than 2 months to go from approval to action. But did Ms. Greenan have a response to any of those questions? I think I saw your hand up.
Yeah. Yes, thank you, Chair. So I'd like to address the first question about the cost increases. So when we developed the estimate, it was based on a proposal from 2019, a 2019 cost estimate. And so what we did was we looked at increases to construction costs, and the manager of asset management and I looked at this, both of us looked at it. So what we did was we looked at an estimated 10% for construction cost inflation based on the construction cost indices for the 3 years. And then we did like a 2% cost inflation for consulting costs. So what we did was when we developed this budget, we had added a 35% contingency because we did not know, what was going to happen with the costs, and then what was going to, and also when the grant would be announced. So when we looked at the our increased 10% construction cost increase and all of the other cost increases, we come out with a contingency of about 20%. And the manager of asset management thinks that that would be appropriate for the level of cost estimates that we had. And so for that reason, we think that we can still do the project for the $6.021 million.
Okay. Just one other question. was the $150,000 further that we're allocating. Is where is that coming from? From the Northside Recreation's budget?
Yes, thank you, through the chair. That would be from, so there were planned in the 2023 and 2024 budgets, we had planned to put a further $150,000 towards the reserves to build funding for eventual replacement of this new building. So what we would do is we would divert those funds from reserves, so it won't change the planned budget for 2023 and 2024. It would just divert the funds from going into the reserves. So instead of the reserve being at $150,000 at the end of 2024, the reserves would be basically eliminated. And then we would have to start building reserves starting in 2025.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else have any questions or comments on the motion? Don't see any hands. All in favor of the motion? All those opposed? Carried unanimously. Good news for the people of Lund. Good news for a portion of the people up there. Well, they will all get an opportunity. Exactly. An alternative opportunity. They will all have a say. Okay, security issuing bylaw, City of Powell. I'll move that motion.
I'll second that.
Second by Director Paul. Staff want to let us know any of the details about that? Yeah. Go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. This is pretty standard. This has been a loan that the city had enacted a few years ago to upgrade the liquid waste treatment plant. And this is the third draw. So this is just a security issuing bylaw. This allows the city now to enter into long-term borrowing. Right now, they're just doing short-term borrowing to get through the project. And they've taken 2 long-term borrowing, and this is their third draw for long-term borrowing.
Any discussion? All those in favor? Director Gisborne.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, this is for the liquid waste treatment plant. Not much of a surprise there. I was trying to find out an answer to a question at a recent convention, because my understanding is the city borrows this money from the regional district, and the regional district borrows the money from the Municipal Finance Authority. My understanding is that process is done because if ever in the hypothetical unable to pay, that it is then the regional district that is, ultimately liable. I have never heard of a municipality being unable to pay their debt. Is that something that has ever happened? That's just, or is this just kind of business as usual, or is it ever something that we should be potentially concerned about? It's a question to our manager of financial services. Thank you.
Director Brabazon has got his hand up, but I'll let the Minister of, or not the Minister, the Director of Financial Services, Ms. Green, you have an answer on.
Thank you, Chair. No, I'm not. I haven't looked at. I haven't done any research to find out if this has ever happened to a municipality, and I'm not aware of any municipalities that have defaulted. But I'm not sure. I'd have to look. I'd have to look that up.
Thank you. Yeah, I've never heard of one defaulting. It was just something I was curious about, and I was wondering if anyone had heard of that as a potential risk. Other than that, I have no concerns, and I'm happy to support the motion. Thank you, Chair.
To answer the question, off the top of my bald head, I cannot remember the names, but we have to go back at least to the 1930s.
So, and I'll take my stab at answering the question about municipal bankruptcies. The fact that the existence of the Municipal Finance Authority has minimized the chances of that happening, because there is in British Columbia a central finance authority for municipalities that does the management of the debt and basically spreads the risk. The municipal bankruptcies that I have heard of, where a lot of them will happen in the United States, where municipalities issue their own bonds with no support other than the municipality. And I've heard of bankruptcies there, but this process of getting approval from the regional district to approve a loan from the municipal finance authority to the city is a very secure form of lending, assures low interest rates and reliable returns.
Well, in response to Director Brabazon's, if the municipality was going bankrupt in the 30s, that would be a time before regional districts. So I think we're in good hands. Thank you, Chair.
All those in favor of the motion? Any opposed? Very unanimous. We have no new business. We are in the question period. Do you have any members of the public or the press who would like to ask a question? No one else? Everybody's gone home? Yeah. Okay. So, you have no in-camera session. And the next item is adjournment. It gives me great pleasure to adjourn this committee meeting. See you next time.
Have a good night, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Recording stopped.